It's 11 p.m. in Washington, D.C. The Capitol is lit up, but it's not just the lights that are buzzing. Phones are lighting up, messages flying across the room, and Republican senators can't believe what they're reading. It's not a foreign crisis. It's not another scandal. The person they're worried about, the president of the United States, their president, and he's furious at them, not at the Democrats, not at the media. He's furious at his own party. This isn't just a disagreement. It's a full-on revolt. And here's the kicker. This isn't something you've seen before. It's not just a political squabble. It could change everything. Stick around, because this moment might be the beginning of something much bigger than we realize. So what's actually going on here? Let's break it down. Republican senators who have stood behind this president time and time again are now making a bold move. They're no longer just playing along. They're actively questioning their president's decisions. Why? Because the president has publicly, and I mean publicly, floated the idea of using military force against Greenland. Yes, Greenland, a place that's part of Denmark, a NATO ally. And this isn't just a throwaway comment. This is serious. Greenland is a part of NATO, an alliance based on the principle that an attack on one is an attack on all. So the president's suggestion doesn't just seem reckless. It could trigger a conflict with our own allies. Think about that for a second. One decision, and it could put us at odds with nations we've fought alongside for decades. And yet some of the president's own party members are quietly working to pass a resolution that would limit his ability to take military action. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern. So what happens when the president's own party decides they've had enough? Now, this is where things get really interesting. Republican senators aren't just talking about this behind closed doors. They're taking action. And the action they're taking, a bipartisan war powers resolution. That's right. Republicans are teaming up with Democrats to pass a measure that would specifically limit the president's ability to act unilaterally in matters of war. This doesn't happen unless something's broken inside the coalition. Think about it. Republicans who have been loyal to this president from day one are now openly challenging his authority. And the president's reaction? Reports say he didn't just pick up the phone to call Senator Susan Collins. He went ballistic. Furious, profane, and threatening. Why? Because to him, power isn't a delegation. It's personal. It belongs to him. So when his own party tells him no, it isn't a Democratic check. It's a betrayal. This isn't just a disagreement. It's a direct confrontation with his power. But here's the kicker. He doesn't just back down, he doubles down. And this is where it gets even more dangerous. When the president's authority is challenged, what does he do? He declares emergencies. And here's the thing. Emergency powers are supposed to be reserved for actual crises. But the president has figured out something dangerous. Emergency declarations don't just unlock policy tools, they unlock political weapons. Once you declare an emergency, the rules change. Congress becomes irrelevant. Debate? That's just an inconvenience. Dissent is no longer disagreement, it's sabotage. And just like clockwork, we see a new national emergency declaration tied to Venezuelan oil assets. The reality, it's about big energy companies, not American families struggling at the pump. The oil, it's going to take years to benefit from. And in the meantime, who's getting the advantage? Multinational corporations, not everyday Americans. But that doesn't matter. Emergencies aren't about what's actually urgent. They're about control. And in this case, it's the perfect tool to change the narrative, distract from growing internal problems, and lock down power. While everyone's eyes are on the war powers fight, this emergency declaration quietly shifts the conversation. But here's what's missing from this picture. None of this feels like a true emergency. It feels like an engineered crisis. Now, let's look at something even more unsettling. While the president is leaning into emergency rhetoric and military threats, there's something else brewing under the surface, something far more procedural, but possibly even more important. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been raising serious questions about oversight failures. The Inspector General, deadlines missed, documents promised but never delivered. These are the kinds of issues that most people don't pay attention to. But here's the thing, they should. Because when these things go unchecked, they expose the cracks in the system. And for a president whose entire strategy relies on controlling the narrative, this oversight is a serious threat. The slow, meticulous work of watchdogs like the Inspector General doesn't fit into a 24-hour news cycle. It can't be buried by tweets or distractions. It's quiet, it's methodical, and it's the kind of thing that could destroy the narrative he's trying to control. What happens when those red flags are ignored, when those investigations stall, defunded, or are staffed with loyalists? The truth starts to slip through the cracks. And in the end, that's the thing the president fears most: accountability. Now let's stack these problems together. First, you have Republican senators openly breaking ranks on the War Powers Resolution, a direct challenge to the president's authority. Then we have emergency declarations that reframe the political landscape, giving the president more control. Next, promised transparency initiatives are completely stalling, raising huge questions about what's being hidden. And on top of all that, we have the president's furious response: threats, intimidation, and escalation. It's like a pressure cooker, each piece pushing the system to the edge. What happens if this continues? What happens when these crises don't just pile up, but start to bleed into one another? When every misstep becomes another test of power, another battle for control? The system starts to break, and the fractures become impossible to ignore. These aren't just isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that's rapidly escalating. The question is, when does it all come crashing down? Now let's step back for a second and look at what this means for you. For the average person, because sure, this might feel like a story about politics, power, and Washington, D.C., but it's bigger than that. This is about what happens when a president ignores the very checks and balances that were put in place to protect us. When power isn't limited, when accountability doesn't matter, who gets hurt? It's not just the political class. It's you, the worker, who sees the government becoming more and more opaque, the voter who wonders why nothing ever seems to change. It's the people who rely on transparency, who expect their government to function and be held accountable. And right now, with these power grabs happening, it's the very foundation of our democracy that's at risk. If you're feeling like something doesn't add up, like you're being left out of the conversation, you're not alone. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments. Because this is not just political theater, this is real, and it's hitting people like you every day. But let's go deeper. This isn't just about one president or one party. It's about the systems in place that allow this kind of behavior to even be possible. It's about the leverage, the incentives, the spectacle, and the fear that allow people in power to push the boundaries without consequence. The truth is, this situation isn't an accident. There's a mechanism that makes this all happen. Presidents, like any other political figure, are driven by the need to maintain control over the narrative, over policy, and over power itself. And when institutions like the legislature fail to act as they should, it sends a signal that the system can be bent, twisted, and even broken without any serious pushback. But what's most unsettling? When those in power understand this game and start playing it to their advantage. They exploit the system's weaknesses. They test the boundaries. And the more they get away with it, the more it normalizes. This is how power works until someone decides it doesn't. But will they? So, where does this go from here? Right now, there are two possible paths. First, maybe this all blows over. Maybe the War Powers Resolution is just a momentary blip. Nothing really changes. Maybe the president's emergency powers continue to grow unchecked, and the system is pushed even further toward chaos. The checks and balances that have held for decades could erode completely. If that happens, the next president inherits a playbook that allows them to bend the rules, make unilateral decisions, and shift the balance of power with little resistance. But then there's the other path. What if the pressure gets to be too much? What if enough Republicans, enough lawmakers hold their ground and start to resist? What if the emergency declarations start to unravel, the investigations gain momentum, and the system fights back? There's a chance that something snaps, that the tide turns, and we see a real shift in the way power is used in this country. But right now, that's uncertain. What we know for sure is that the next move is already being decided by lawmakers, by the president, and by the people watching. And here's the deep truth behind it all. The struggle we're witnessing isn't just about one man or one administration. It's about whether power still has limits. It's about whether institutions, whether democracy itself can hold in the face of a president who believes the system should bend to his will. And right now, we're watching a test, one that will shape every presidency that follows. What's happening now, the decisions being made behind closed doors, will create the template for the future. If enough people stand firm, if enough resist, it might just be enough to preserve the integrity of the system. But if the system falls silent, if the guardrails continue to erode, what comes next might look very different from the democracy we once knew. And that's the stakes. That's the question. Stay tuned, because this story isn't over, and the next chapter might be the most important one yet.